Well, now, this is Saturday, oddly enough.
Uh,
And normally it should be Friday, but for some reason there's been a time shift and it's Saturday. How are you today, Pat?
well, I'm grand. The
This
reason we didn't
Saturday.
do it yesterday, I have two teeth less than I was this time yesterday, or no, I had to go to the
That's
dentist yesterday.
well, that's the failing body, Pat. Comes with age,
Yes,
comes to all of
sure.
us eventually.
I
Comes
remember
along.
watching a
Offer it
film
up
about
for holy souls.
exactly, but I remember watching a film Jude, about an Indian, an old American Indian, and I remember he said he had reached the stage that now he could, was it pemmican or something, they used to eat it quite hard. And anyway, I remember he said, I have now reached the stage of my grandfather. I can only eat soft foods. And I was thinking to myself, that day's coming for me too.
Yeah. There's a bugger. Well, not to worry, not to worry. Let's attack the affairs of the nation, not concern ourselves with our own personal fortunes, but the fortunes of the public arena. Connor Burns, who you say is going to be the next Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Isn't it going to be this Vara guy or whatever?
Shailesh Farah. No, several people are saying that Burns was sent out to America by Boris Johnson to sell the British version of the protocol.
Yeah.
He didn't do a great job, but it showed how much standing. He's also, he's born in Northern Ireland and his people are from Northern Ireland. I think he's from a Catholic background, but
you may be sure. Connor Burns. Burns.
Yeah. But I think he's certainly not very nationalistic, and I think he's gay as well, by the way. Which so this is just by way of background. But anyway, apparently, according to several sources, he's very much in the frame. Salish virus was a sort of stopgap, but Burns apparently could well be, if Liz Truss gets in, he could be her Northern Ireland Secretary of State. And yesterday, he said very, very clearly the DUP should get back into Stormont, that the cost of living crisis, all the things, the energy crisis, the health crisis, everything's going up and there's real problem. And he says, leave the protocol to the British government and let the DUP and the other parties here sort out what we need. He says there's money there and it needs to be spent, and there are people in hardship and it's time to get back to work.
Yeah, well, he's quite right. He's quite right. Oh, God, you hear that sound? That's terrible. That sound's come back. But anyway, yeah, he's quite right. I must say, I find the Tories just a little bit naive, They get a guy called Connor Burns, who clearly comes from an Irish Catholic background, and they say, oh, that'll make the nationalists and Republicans happy. And the Unionists will be happy too, because he's going to be preaching a right-wing doctrine, really. What a load of rubbish. Emma Pengelly, I gather, isn't a bit pleased. Little Pengelly, she says that Burns' intervention is misguided. I mean, I thought that was the rules. The rules are that if you have, 4 consecutive periods of 6 weeks where negotiations are put after an election to try to form a government, if you haven't formed one after 4 consecutive 6-week periods, then what happens then?
You call it an election?
Oh, it's an election. That's right. They call it an election. So, does the British government, does Connor Burns know something the rest of us don't know? Because that time's coming up very soon.
Shailesh Farah says that if they don't get something cobbled together soon, that by the end of October, which we're September, October, we're into it already, that he will have to call elections. Now, the parties have already been given a mandate, and the Taoiseach was speaking somewhere at the I think it was Oxford, at the about a British Irish forum yesterday, and he said we don't need another election, etc. But Jude, I've said this to you before. I do think that the Unionists, particularly the DUP, well, really the DUP, are hanging out for another election. They want something big on the protocol that they can sell to their electorate and go back to the electorate and say, look, see the last time you took away your votes from us. We've got you a big deal now on the protocol. We've sorted it out. Now come back and give us their votes, and Sir Geoffrey will get us First Minister. Because, Jude, I genuinely believe, because I've talked to him and I've seen him, a lot of unions just can't deal with this, particularly more hardline. The fact that a Sinn Féin, now John Hume might have been acceptable, but to see Michelle O'Neill sitting in the front seat when the royal family, or when an American president, or when an EU leader comes and she's First Minister, they're having serious problems psychologically with that.
Yeah. I suppose it depends on which of the two gets home first. at present, there's a bill going through the Commons and it's going to be sent to the House of Lords, which is going to, essentially rip up part of the agreement with the EU. And I'm sure the DUP would be very happy with that. But it might be that the election might be called before that bill would make its way. Now, I wonder, would the DUP be satisfied with that, to say, oh, well, it'll be okay because it's going to go right through and we have their word for it. But I mean, Jeffrey was very definite that they wanted to see it in action rather than just in words. So have you any idea which of the two is going to come through first? The carrying up of the protocol that's going through the Commons at present, or the date for a general election?
I would bet put serious money on the election first, Jude, because there's no way they're going to get the House of Parliament right. Come Monday, Boris Johnson resigns, I think, on Monday. I presume Liz Truss will be announced as the leader after that. And usually new leaders have a whole lot of things they want to get done and so on. And then this bill has to go into the House of Commons. Then it has to be sent to the Lords. That's not going to be done today or tomorrow. That's going to take months.
Well, supposing in that case, can the Tories give a goodie regarding the protocol to the DUP?
I don't. Jude, here, I'll put it to you the other way. If the British ministers abrogate themselves the right to decide what goes into the EU, because Northern Ireland is part of the EU in regard to trading, they're giving up their sovereignty, and there is no way they're going. Like Sefcovic said that several times, that there's no way an outside body can decide for the EU what's going to be allowed in. So that's the end of the EU. If a British minister can unilaterally decide, look, we're going to let X, Y, and Z into Northern Ireland, and then it can go down south, etc., etc., they have to negotiate it, and if they don't, the EU aren't going to agree it. So I don't see. And then, Jude, that's a trade war.
Yeah. Well, it does seem that the DUP are intent on getting rid of this notion that you treat the North, the occupied counties, differently from the rest of the UK. I think they're going to have to just suck it up myself. And in any case, I don't know if you agree, but if there was an election, I don't think the DUP would do particularly well. They might say, "Oh, look at this! We're going to get this for the protocol," but it won't show. And even it does show, it'll be at the cost of business cross border.
But there's two or three things at play there. I wonder how many of their, I was going to say spectators, their supporters, are so happy. Jude, a lot of yours have been sitting waiting on a hospital appointment or a GP's appointment, or you're sitting, Jude, worrying the hell about how you're going to pay your latest electricity bill or whatever. Jude, you're going to be saying, wait a minute, you're going to be very angry at the DUP. And the second point is, who says they're going to get anything anyway?
Well, they're eternally optimistic. I suppose they have suffered so much. The situation they're in at present is so bad that they figure things can only get better, to quote a song. Anyway, we will see what we will see. And you might even get a sort of a headline on Monday or Tuesday when Liz Truss takes the helm. She'll almost certainly say something about the protocol.
Yeah.
Emma Little Pengelly is not impressed anyway. Anyway, let's move to the free part of our island of Ireland. That is your part. And apparently the Irish government, the Dublin government, has found a surplus of 6.3 billion at the end of August. Now tell me this, Pat. Clarify this for me. This Dublin government is forever finding billions, sudden billions out of nowhere. And I presume these are real billions, and yet people are struggling. I mean, struggling isn't the word for it. People are paralytic in terms of trying to make ends meet, in terms of housing and heating and everything else. How can those two things exist at the same time?
Jude, exports are way up. Income tax take us way up. Jude, they're predicting some sort of a rate of growth of about somewhere about 10.5%. I don't know what it is, Jude. Jude, we are the second biggest exporter of computer software in the world, behind Silicon Valley. The idea of Ireland as a green and pleasant land where where it's fishing and farming are that day's long gone. Dude, Ireland's making serious money. Most of the big corporations in the world have their headquarters in Ireland to service the EU. It's a totally changed society. But you should never judge what's happening on the ground with the profits of big corporations. Dude, in Dublin, impossible to pay rent. Galway, impossible to pay rent. Cork, same, impossible to get a house. House prices are flying because of the success of the economy. Dude, it's ordinary people are getting priced out of things. So 6.3 billion on the face of, Dude, the last day, let me finish that point. When I started. My wife got our electricity bill, 350 quid or something. Dude, about this time last year, it was something like about 120.
I like the way you say your wife got the electricity bill.
I knew that you'd pick up on that. But Rosie opened the thing the last day and she walked in. Good merciful God.
Did you duck as it came in later?
I ducked. But
over your head.
It is serious.
I really don't know how that could be. I actually think that when people hear that there's 6.3 billion has been discovered, this surplus by the Dublin government, and then when they look at their lives, they're going to be even more cheesed off than they are at present. Because if they say, here, these guys are getting all this money, so how come I'm stuck in the misery here and poverty? So it's only going to underline the poverty they're experiencing.
Well, the government, there's a budget at the end of September, and Pascal Donoghue, the Minister for Finance, is going to have to balance very carefully, because people who are needing their gas and their energy, their oil and their coal or whatever you want to these days. Dude, it's got unbelievable. They're talking about a bag of coal now costing somewhere north of 40 to 50 euros. A bag of coal, dude. If you're on a fixed income as a pensioner, 2 or 3 bags of coal a week, that's your pension gone.
He'll have to. I think the Pascal Donoghue will have to have a pretty massive handout to people to tide them over the winter. They'll have to spend all of that 6.3 billion on looking after the electorate or the worst stricken, I would have thought, and pray that they'll be appreciative of that. Because at present, there's little signs of any degree of popularity in the government.
But Jude, can I go offside a wee bit? I know you're a big fan of this, but at the same of the Green agenda. But at the same time, the Green Party want to introduce carbon taxes, and this whole thing, Jude, they're shutting down or want. If I have a wee bit of a commercial enterprise selling turf to you, I think as possibly this month, if I have a wee shop somewhere and I sell turf and you come in, and you're an inspector from Donegal County Council or from government, I can get fined for selling turf to you. And Jude, I would love to be the inspector walking into a shops and trying to, or some fireman says, "Oh, by the way, you can't sell turf," in the middle of where a bag of coals costs maybe 50 euros.
I can see the emotion behind that. I mean, there's a whole tradition, and it's part of the culture and the history and everything else, as well as the bread and butter. Being able to heat your home. But at the same time, I suppose be up to the government to sort of plug the hole of it for the moment. But there's no doubt about it. They really have to pay attention to this climate crisis. They really have to pay attention to it. And this thing where people are saying, I won't be able to heat my home this winter. That's not strictly speaking true. We for years and years and years. I mean, my childhood was spent, and there was the house wasn't heated the way that people talk. You got hot water bottles, and you put on socks when you're in bed, and maybe a jersey, and you just had a manage. It's at least as serious now. I mean, I heard the Brits talking about where is Britain in terms of meeting its commitments, that it would be carbon neutral by 2050. And they said they're miles behind, behind. And they're probably ahead of the Republic.
Yeah. So anyway, it's going to be very interesting. But anyway, Jude, we have 6.3 billion that we weren't expecting.
Well, I suppose that's a cause for rejoicing. But I'd say it would set that, if you'll pardon me using the expression, it would set on edge the teeth of people who are trying to make ends meet. Yeah. Okay, let's go transatlantic briefly and check out Joe Biden. Joe Biden says American democracy is under attack, to which I can only say, in the words of Homer Simpson, "Do." Like, has he only noticed that now?
Yeah, no, but Jude, for a long time there, he's enraged a lot of the Republicans. But Joe Biden finally came out big time. I think it was Thursday night. He was speaking somewhere in Boston. Was that where the Liberty Bell or someone was? Philadelphia. Yeah, Philadelphia. Right. So he was speaking there, and he said, "What's happening?" He says, "America democracy is under threat." He says, "These are people He says, "We have now got a party led by a man who, when he doesn't win, claims it's a fix." He says, "Who are attacking the institutions of the state, namely courts and the FBI and so on." He says they are refusing to accept democratic norms and so on. And he referred to the Maga crowd. He says, particularly some of the more extremes one, as semi-fascists. And now Kevin McCarthy, typical, I was about to swear there, Irishman, right wing, all the right wingers in America seem to have Irish names. But anyway, he says this is an attack on decent, patriotic Americans and so on, and that he has smeared Republicans who are whatever. But Jude, when you consider the fact that a president of America sat back and watched as a mob stormed their House of Parliament and actually, walled them on, encouraged them. When you consider the fact that he rang up Secretary of State somewhere, was it Pittsburgh or somewhere, and told him to find 11,000 votes. When he also got onto another guy and said, "See these? I think they have what the electoral vote, the people who sort of authenticate the votes." He told them, "Get rid of them and get our guys." And I know it was just downright fascism. In other words, don't accept the result.
That's true. Yeah.
And by the way, but America is such a major powerhouse in the Western world. If America goes down to sort of the pan, what happens to us?
Well, listen, I mean, let us face it. America survived 4 years of Trump. I think they'll survive another 2 years without Trump, even if he was to win the next election. But all this is about the midterm elections, which are due in November, I think it is. So both Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden are really talking to the electorate, who will be making decisions regarding the Senate and the House of Representatives. So they're after that. I think Joe Biden's not doing too bad a job, A lot of people thought they were going to get slaughtered in these midterm elections. But Biden got a big package passed in terms of green economy, I think. Didn't he? He's coming out swinging against Trump, and a lot of people want that. They want a bit less of the kid gloves and gentlemanly talk.
I think a lot of people thought that he was trying to sort of what was it, Michelle Obama, when they go low, we go high. That only works to a certain extent. I think a lot of Democrats saying we're fed up to the teeth taking this crap from the Republicans. It's time we start hitting back, and we start, because I think they were starting to come across as soft.
That's right. Well, that's the old thing. You see, reasonableness is sometimes mistaken for weakness, and clearly that was happening there. Anyway, no more Mr. Nice Guy with Joe Biden. Let's hope.
No, exactly.
Let's hope. Okay, shoot on, because there's a lot of stuff to cover here. Can we talk a wee bit about the Ukrainians in the south of Ireland?
Yeah.
Because the 50,000th Ukrainian is due to arrive in Ireland as a refugee shortly.
Yeah.
That's a lot of Ukrainians in a pretty short period of time. And what's more, the people from other countries than the Ukraine seeking international protection in the south of Ireland are almost tripled to what they were before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do with all these people?
This is straight up, and this is not meant either racist or anything else, but I was in Letterkenny. I grew up in Letterkenny when it was monoculture. And I think I might have said this to you before. Letterkenny is now coming down with people of colour, with people from Eastern Europe. I was in a couple of shops, or at the fringes of a couple of shops, and the people in them were not speaking English. I was down on Dunlow, a wee place, Dunlow, and I was in a charity shop. They've always got books in there, so I went in there, and there was two people in. both speaking Russian or Ukrainian, or I'm not quite sure, but certainly Eastern European. And Jude, and a couple of other wee things. There's a hotel not a million miles away from here. They had something up quite recently. Have when somebody can buy you, a weekend away sort of thing, vouchers. They said people, if you've been bought a voucher, you have to sort of present it within the next month. And I was wondering why is that. And somebody says, "Oh, they're preparing for taking in Ukrainians." And Jude, it's absolutely a wonderful business. They're getting paid absolute fortunes by the government. And we were down to Cavan earlier in the summer, Jude, and I was wondering why I could see these sort of left-hand drive cars, a couple of them anyway. And we were staying in this hotel overnight, and we saw all these kids and these women. They were Ukrainians. The hotel has been basically taken over. Jude, there's very, very little hotel accommodation available for tourists or guests. It's now a lot of them. It's so lucrative that all these people are suddenly got into this because they're guaranteed whatever it is, $1 million a month or something.
But Pat, would you not? Surely you're not saying you begrudge these people who are fleeing
not
for their lives.
Not at all.
Well, what's the problem then? What is the problem?
There's about 50,000. Well, the problem I'd say for a lot of people is not the actual Ukrainians, but services have gone to hell. Dude, the health services is absolutely bursting at the seams. Try getting an appointment with a doctor. Schools are very similar. So but in fairness, I don't think the government could have planned for it because it came, they didn't plan for Putin to invade Ukraine. But Jude, there's a massive increase in the number of people coming from all over the world because, Jude, if you look at a lot of the windows, I've even seen it in the back of lorries, we are recruiting. And who was it? I read, Michael O'Leary said yesterday or the day before he was speaking somewhere in London, and he says, Britain has actually gone down the pan because they can't do without foreign workers.
Well, okay, so the first thing is the number of people who are in the South of Ireland at present, 50,000 Ukrainians, and there's a lot of other people from other places in the world. Is that bad for Ireland? Is it really that they can't cope? Because I was watching prime time last night on RTE or the night before, and there was a couple of people talking from, I think it was Kildare, and they were explaining how really they were very concerned about all these Ukrainians, and they were at pains to stress, they weren't saying they were in favor of Ukrainians, but there was no heed being paid or planning being paid to how they would be provided for. Now, I don't believe that. I think there's a streak of racism in the Irish people. I think they're probably right that there wasn't proper planning in terms of provision for these people. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of people who, well, let's say maybe at a certain point, like whenever they see pictures on the TV of Ukrainians have a terrible time and people fleeing and crying, they say, oh God, I have to have these people in. And of course I'll give them a room. And then they give them a room, or they come to their area, their town, their village. And after about, they say, the research indicates between 3 and 6 weeks after people have been accommodated from a huge global disaster, about 3 to 6 weeks later, empathy begins to wither on the vine.
Absolutely.
The enthusiasm for helping these people begins to go off, and people get, in fact, quite antagonistic about something they brought on themselves.
Yeah. Well, see, I think, Jude, there was 10,000 offers of accommodation.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's 4,000 or 5,000 still, people living in Ukrainians living in private houses. But Jude, that reminds me of my old friend who lived down the road. He spent many years in Australia, and when he came back to live here again, a lot of people from Australia used to call and see him. And one day I met him one day, and he says, "Pat, it's becoming a pain in the ass." And I says, "What do you say?" He says, "Somebody comes for a day or two, I don't mind. But he says, I've one guy there now, and he says he's been there 3 weeks, and there's no sign of moving on." So what he basically was saying is, like, it was nothing to do with racism. He just says he's freeloading off me. But Jude, there's another thing too, by the way, and I think you mentioned, but you didn't allude to it there now. There's a certain thing about NIMBYism. Not in my backyard.
That's it, exactly.
there are people. They're talking about building as a modular houses, and maybe even some tents or stuff like that.
Oh, there are tents. There's some of them living in tents.
Tents,
There.
But Jude, they're going to have to do something. What was it, about 10 years ago or 8 years ago? I remember reading something that there was now about 300,000 Poles living in Ireland. Now, Jude, that's there's supposed to be 32 counties, so you could have 33 counties and call the 33rd one Poland. And
but that's no hard patch, surely. You're not saying it.
But you know the thing. If you or I had a heart attack, now try getting into Letterkenny Hospital. Without giving details, there was a person within my family circle, and quite recently had quite a serious attack, and she was left sitting on a recliner chair for 3 days. 3 days, Jude, with a serious, and I mean serious. I don't mean a cut finger.
Do you think that comes out of the fact that there is all this extra pressure from outside, these immigrants,
and there's bad,
whatever, on the health service?
No, it's not just down that. No, Jude, I've said it a million times. There is something seriously wrong with the health system in the Republic, and it was there long before the Ukrainians arrived.
Yeah, but this is adding pressure to it, enormous pressure. If you have an extra 50,000, 60,000, whatever number of thousands people, clearly. I think the problem is people and countries should be level-headed, and they shouldn't rush into making promises they're not capable of standing by.
Yeah.
And to announce to the Ukrainians, we'll take you in, that's a great thing to say, and it's a great thing to do. But if you can't sustain it, you shouldn't make the promise in the first place, because you just end up looking really stupid and nasty. And that's what the fact of the matter is now. There are people, those people, I'm sure those two particular people who were on prime time from Kildare and who were speaking for their area were sincere, good people. But it was hard to get rid of the thought in my head that these are people who are just a bit cheesed off with these people coming in and taking up land and living in tents and coming into our shops and talking in their own language and are changing the whole nature of the area. If Ireland wants to be like that, if they don't want people to come in, they should at least come out clean and say it. We don't like people coming in.
By the way, I think the areas you were talking about was it Newbridge and Rathangan?
Yes. You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
But Jude, hey, the Irish have in my humble opinion, have the least right in the world possibly to condemn about immigration or immigration. We immigrated. Right, I've always said, if you went to the moon, you'd probably find a wee man from Kerry sitting having a pint there, because we Irish have gone everywhere. So we should understand what it's like for people. But the other thing I read, I think it was in the Irish Times this morning, the Ukrainian ambassador says there's a sort of a lot of Chinese whispers that Ukrainians are involved in this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
She says not a single Ukrainian. They have not received a single report of any Ukrainian being involved in any crime. And by the way, I've heard of it.
But I think a sort of a bridge has been crossed here. There's a lot of public representatives saying things about this whole question. For example, Sinn Féin TD Patricia Ryan sent letters to 500 householders claiming if this process is not managed right and the views of the locally based representatives are not listened to, the potential for significant conflict with host communities is significant. Now, you might say, well, that's just stating the facts. But once people hear that coming from a public representative, the notion of conflict, I think, is heightened rather than lessened. And it's not just Sinn Féin. I mean, there's lots of others. Matty McGrath says there should be a cap on the number of refugees. And as independent, Danny Healy-Rae and Michael Collins, they want a cap on the number of Ukrainians. Now, maybe they're sensible, maybe they're right, but that should all have been sorted out before they opened the door.
Well, I think, Jude, you've just hit the nail on the head. That's exactly the point. Jude, I think when you make comments like that, you're actually sort of lighting the match a wee bit, aren't you?
Yeah.
To the haystack. And that's not the way. By the way, their comments are totally fair and totally reasonable if it's in the right context. If you can't give people decent houses and treat them fair, you shouldn't really take them here. But once they're here, Jude, I don't think making comments like that there's going to be conflict. That's just suggesting, the power of suggestion is contained therein.
Absolutely. Once you mention it, gels with or chimes with what's in people's heads, what they're afraid to say.
Yes.
I hate to say this, but it's a bit like Trump. Trump saying stuff that people were thinking in the back of their heads and sort of ashamed of. Let's move on very quickly because there's two other items I'd like to have a quick look at. One is this question of childcare and the cost of a creche. In the Irish Times, I think it was today or yesterday, had a heading, "My friends in Finland pay €150 per month for creche. My husband and I pay 1,100. The cost of childcare in Ireland is something massive. It says, for example, if you live in Dunleary Rathdown and you have two children going to childcare, it's going to cost you 2,500 a month.
Yeah.
People just can't. I don't think people can manage with that. Is there anything to be done about this, I wonder?
Well, Jude, in the coming budget, they're going to have to seriously look at. I can speak from personal experience. My youngest son, he has two kids, and I'm pretty certain he told me they were paying 1,700 a month. Jude, 1,700 a month, and so Jude, that is serious amount of money. Mm-hmm. Jude, multiply that by 12 is what, about 15,000-16,000 quid.
Oh yeah.
Jude, that is like he's working and his wife is working. And it's a serious drain on the resources. Jude, I don't know, years ago, well, of course, maybe sometimes a wife stayed at home, or there was or something.
That was it, Pat. You put your finger on it. I think you put your finger on it. It wasn't a problem because you had one of the couples, always the woman, at home looking after the children, so you didn't have to pay for it. But nowadays, in order to even have a chance of paying a mortgage, both people have to be out working, and as a result, this thing comes at them in terms of childcare. The thing is, how does Finland or whatever it was manage with 150 per month? Yeah, Finland pay 150 per month.
Because I presume there's subsidies.
Taxes. Heavier taxes. Well, then, I mean, that's a simple answer. You're going to have to pay heavier taxes for it.
Yeah.
Would that work?
Or the government, and I think in Finland and in Holland and places like that, and Denmark, makes subsidies creche facilities.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll need to look. If we have 6.2 million or billion,
but we've spent that already, Pat. We've spent that. That was going on the heating of the house.
Geez, I would hate to be a young couple now.
The
mortgages, the stress on young people these days. The mortgage is off the scale. Childcare is off the scale. Heating costs are off the scale. Jesus, Jude, no wonder they're having real problems.
It's not just here, actually. If you stop to think about it, if you look at the reports from the BBC, the people there there's any number of strikes appearing, and there's a lot of people saying openly that the attitude of the Labour Party in England is just not good enough. And you do have the sense that people are going to be taken to the streets. I know I've said this before, but it's hard to see where they can go. What can you do?
But the CEO of the post office in Britain, he's on 800,000 a year. The shareholders have got massive remuneration, and then he claims that the postmen on £12 an hour are greedy.
Yeah,
you have to laugh.
What about, Pat? Let me just very briefly give me a yes/no answer. Would you ever favour one of the two people, the partners of the children, the parents of the children, staying at home?
Aye.
You would fear it?
Yeah. Well, like, for instance, I shouldn't really, but I would love to know how much my son and his wife, particularly, if they took one of their wages away, how much difference it would make. Now, the only thing, in the sense, if they're paying 1,700 a month straight out, that would be probably about 2,000 after tax. So that'd be 24,000 a year. Now, I'm not going to give either one of their wages away, but that'd be near enough. I'd say, or 3/4 of somebody's wages.
Yeah. It would be case for say, I know a woman who said, in fact, she was one of the women I interviewed for that last book, and she said, I had children, and I didn't have children so somebody else could rear them. She stayed at home from her job, which struck me as very selfless of her. Now, the fact of the matter is, rearing children and being with them all day is a hard, in my opinion, boring job. And yet, women have done it selflessly for generations. So in a way, hard to blame them, really. Anyway, last point, Pat, and that was this little final item about this teacher who objects to addressing a student with the pronoun they. Give us a quick, because we've only about 30 seconds.
He was up in court yesterday, so I'm not going to get involved in the court. But apparently, he's a very devout member of the Church of Ireland, as far as I know. And he said it's against his principles. And he's also claiming it's ramming it down the throats of the other children in the school that he's been told to tell a transgender person to call a transgender person they. Now,
What do you think yourself?
From the point of view of language, one person's they. Go ahead.
Okay, what do you think? Because
I don't think I totally disagree that he should. I don't think he should have been told to call somebody they.
I agree with you. I think it's nonsense on a stick. It really is absolute rubbish. And we will take this topic and we'll deal with it thoroughly next time. Pat, thank you very much.
All the best, Jude.
I hope your tooth gets better. Okay.
My teeth.